I still remember the sting in my mother's voice. "Don't come for Christmas, we'll pretend we don't know you." My brother laughed so loudly that the room joined in, and I stood there, invisible in my own family. For years I swallowed their words, their mockery, their comparisons, until silence became my only shield. That night, I walked away, carrying nothing but rejection. But destiny is cruel and poetic. 5 days later, during their perfect Christmas party, a single photograph of me appeared, and everything they thought they controlled began to collapse before their eyes. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. A white picket fence, a father who had served proudly in the military, a mother who taught literature at the local high school, and 2 children who, at least in the town's eyes, were blessed with every opportunity. But beneath that polished image, the hierarchy was carved in stone. Daniel, my older brother, was the golden child, and I, Claire Mitchell, was the shadow. From as early as I can remember, comparisons were the air I breathed. "Look at Daniel's grades," my mother would beam at dinner. "He's going places." Then her eyes would shift to me, narrowing, dismissive. "Claire, you should try harder. No one notices mediocrity." My father, usually quiet, never intervened. When he did speak, it was only to reinforce the truth I was already learning. I was less. One evening, when I was 9, my mother bent low as I clutched a drawing I had worked on for days. I wanted her approval so badly. She barely glanced at it. "Pretty scribbles, but you'll never outshine Daniel. Accept that, Claire. You were born to stay in the background." That sentence rooted itself inside me like poison. I remember standing there, cheeks burning, as Daniel smirked, enjoying the way the spotlight never left him. Years later, I overheard a conversation that confirmed what I had always felt. I had crept downstairs late at night, thirsty for water, when my parents' voices drifted from the living room. My mother said, "We should invest everything in Daniel's future. He's the one who'll make something of himself." My father agreed, without hesitation. "Claire, she'll be fine. Some kids just aren't meant for greatness." They laughed as if my life had been neatly filed away under irrelevant. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching the glass of water, feeling like I'd been erased before I even had the chance to exist. Still, I tried. In middle school, I poured myself into writing. Stories became the only place where I felt alive, where my voice mattered. I wrote and rewrote until my fingers cramped. When a short story of mine won first place in a regional contest, it felt like my heart had finally broken free. I rushed home with the certificate, bursting with pride. But by the time the news spread to my parents, Daniel had already intercepted it. At dinner, he held the paper, waving it in the air. "Look what I wrote," he declared. My parents cheered, showering him with praise. I tried to protest. It was mine. But my mother cut me off. "Don't be bitter, Claire. Daniel is talented. Learn to be happy for your brother." That night, I cried myself to sleep, my certificate hidden under his name in the family photo album. The pattern repeated endlessly. Every small achievement of mine was dismissed, mocked, or worse, handed over to Daniel as if it never belonged to me. When I made the debate team, my mother scoffed. "Debating won't put food on the table." When I landed a summer job at a bookstore, my father chuckled. "Real ambition means more than stacking shelves." I began to feel that no matter what I did, my existence was designed to prove one truth. I was invisible in their eyes. But invisibility carries its own sharp edge. I noticed the way relatives ignored me during family gatherings, turning instead to Daniel's stories of triumph. "Your brother will be a lawyer one day," they would say, their smiles wide, their eyes glowing. When it was my turn to speak, the conversation drifted elsewhere, as if the sound of my voice was just background noise. Do you know that feeling? That sinking ache of being the extra chair at your own table? The guest in your own family? Then came the day I stumbled upon the envelope. I was 14, rummaging through a drawer in my mother's desk, looking for tape. When I found it, a thick envelope addressed to me, its seal already broken. My hands shook as I pulled out the letter. It was an offer, a scholarship to a summer writing program at a prestigious university. My name was typed at the top, clear as day. I had been chosen. The air rushed out of my lungs as I realized what this meant. Someone, somewhere, believed in me. But then the truth hit me harder. The envelope had been hidden, tucked away where I would never have found it if not by accident. My mother had kept it from me. My chest tightened as I heard her footsteps behind me. She froze when she saw the letter in my hands. For a moment, guilt flickered across her face, then hardened into disdain. "Claire," she said, her voice sharp, "you don't need to waste time chasing dreams. That program would only distract you. Daniel has college applications to prepare for, and we need to keep our focus on him." I wanted to scream, to beg, but the words wouldn't come. She snatched the letter away and tore it in half before my eyes. Something cracked inside me that day. Not just the loss of an opportunity, but the crushing weight of betrayal by the very person meant to nurture me. I walked out of that room numb. The echo of ripping paper seared into my memory. Even now, decades later, I can still hear it. The sound of a door slamming shut on my worth. By the time I turned 25, the script my family had written for me was engraved in my bones. I was useless. Every attempt to prove otherwise collapsed under the weight of their ridicule. After graduating from a small state college, I tried to break into the world of media. It seemed like a field where words mattered, where I could carve a space for myself. I landed an entry-level job at a local radio station, and for a moment, I thought I'd found a foothold. But my family reacted with disdain. At dinner one weekend, Daniel chuckled when I mentioned it. "So you're basically pressing buttons for other people to talk? That's not a career, Claire. That's babysitting equipment." My mother shook her head. "We expected more from you, especially since Daniel is preparing for law school." Their laughter filled the table, while I sat in silence, chewing on food that turned to ashes in my mouth. I pushed forward anyway. I worked long hours, staying after shifts to learn editing software, volunteering to cover small segments. It was exhausting but thrilling. I was building something, even if no one else saw it. Then one morning, my manager called me into his office. His tone was cold. "Claire, we've received some concerning reports. Apparently you've been speaking poorly about the station, saying it's a dead-end job. People are questioning your loyalty." I stared at him, shocked. "That's not true. I've never said anything like that." But the decision was final. My contract was terminated. It wasn't until weeks later that I discovered the source. A friend from college confided in me that Daniel had been spreading rumors, telling people I was untrustworthy, lazy, and bitter. He had accidentally let it slip at a dinner with acquaintances who happened to know people at the station. My own brother had sabotaged me, and my parents likely knew. When I confronted Daniel, he smirked. "Don't look at me like that. I did you a favor. You'll never succeed in that world anyway. Better to learn now." His words sliced deeper than the job loss. It was confirmation. In his eyes, I wasn't competition. I was a nuisance to be eliminated. I found myself in a cheap apartment with peeling paint and a single flickering lamp. I worked temporary jobs, waitressing, filing papers, anything to cover rent. At night, I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, my body hollowed out by exhaustion and grief. The dreams I had carried since childhood, stories, words, the power of creation, felt distant, like they belonged to another life. One evening, when the silence pressed too heavily, I broke down. I sat on the floor of that tiny room, knees pulled to my chest, and sobbed until my body shook. My tears dripped onto a notebook that lay beside me, pages filled with fragments of stories I hadn't dared to finish. And then it happened. My phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "I believe in your talent. Let's meet." My breath caught. I didn't recognize the number. For a moment, fear and hope collided in my chest. Who could it be? The next day, curiosity overpowered hesitation. I agreed to meet at a quiet cafe. There, waiting at a corner table, sat a woman in her late 40s, her eyes sharp yet kind. She introduced herself as Evelyn, a literary editor. She had stumbled across short stories I'd anonymously posted online under a username that barely had followers. "Your voice is raw, honest," she said. "I think people need to hear it." Her words landed like water on parched ground. For the first time in years, someone saw me. With Evelyn's encouragement, I began to write again, but under a pen name. It felt safer that way, as if I could build a world untouched by the weight of my family's shadow. Night after night, after long shifts at thankless jobs, I poured myself into stories. I wrote about loneliness, betrayal, the quiet strength of people overlooked. Readers began to find me one by one. Comments appeared. This story felt like my life. Whoever you are, thank you for writing this. My words resonated, and slowly a community formed around them. Months later, one of my stories went viral. Shared across social media, it traveled further than I had ever dreamed. Publishers reached out. Under my pen name, I signed a modest book deal, never once revealing my real identity. And when the book hit the shelves, something extraordinary happened. It landed on the best-seller list. I held the copy in my hands, my name hidden behind the pseudonym, and laughed through tears. I had made it, yet no one in my family had the faintest idea. If you were me, would you have told them? Would you have risked pulling back the curtain to show them the truth, or would you have hidden it, savoring the secret power of being underestimated? Evelyn urged me to think bigger. There's interest from film studios, she said one afternoon, sliding a contract across the table. They want to adapt your book. My heart raced as I traced the words with trembling fingers. A film, my words on screen. It felt impossible, yet it was real. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the contract on the nightstand. My phone buzzed again with another message from Evelyn. The studio is waiting for your answer. My chest tightened with both fear and exhilaration. Everything I had dreamed of, the recognition, the stage, the justice, was suddenly within reach. Success crept into my life like dawn, quiet and gradual, until suddenly the room was filled with light. Under my pen name, I had become an online phenomenon. Readers shared my words with captions like, "This story broke me and healed me in the same breath." My inbox filled with messages from strangers across the world who felt less alone because of the sentences I had bled onto the page. Money followed, slowly at first, then in waves. Book royalties, speaking invitations under the veil of anonymity, freelance contracts. Soon I could afford more than rent. Yet I resisted the temptation to flaunt it. I still wore the same worn-out coat, still cooked simple meals, still lived in the modest apartment with peeling paint. It wasn't shame that kept me small. It was armor. If my family ever discovered the truth too soon, they would claw at it, twist it, diminish it. My anonymity was freedom. The irony came one night when Daniel, basking in the attention of family friends, read aloud from one of my own pieces. He had no idea. "Listen to this nonsense," he said, laughter dripping from every syllable. The girl who was invisible in her own home grew into a woman who built worlds no one could take away. His friends laughed with him, not realizing he was mocking his sister's work. I sat there silently, my nails digging crescents into my palms under the table. They laughed at me, yet they were praising me at the same time. It was a surreal, bitter victory. After that evening, I walked home alone, replaying the moment over and over. Rage simmered, but beneath it was a strange exhilaration. They were laughing at words that millions of people adored. Daniel thought he was shredding me, but in truth, he was applauding me. I held on to that paradox like fuel. Weeks later, I stood in a bookstore, heart pounding as I stared at a glossy international magazine. On the cover was a headline, "The Anonymous Author Changing Literature." Beneath it was my pen name. My photo wasn't there, but inside the article they printed a silhouette, mine, though obscured. I flipped through the pages in disbelief, my breath shallow. For the first time, the weight of it hit me. I was no longer just surviving. I was building. But I told no one, at least no one in my family. To them, I remained the failure, the disappointment. And strangely, I let them, because their blindness was my shield. Behind that shield, I expanded my reach. Evelyn introduced me to publishers, CEOs, and even film directors. I sat in meetings where people twice my age hung onto my words, asking me how I wanted my stories to be shaped. I signed contracts, negotiated rights, and watched as my name, my pen name, climbed lists I had once only dreamed of. Still, I kept my real identity locked away like a secret diary. One afternoon, after cashing my largest check yet, I walked past a jewelry store and stopped. In the display case was a simple silver bracelet, delicate and unassuming. It reminded me of the bracelets I used to admire in shop windows as a child, when I had no allowance and only longing in my pockets. I stepped inside and bought it. That evening, as I clasped it around my wrist, tears burned my eyes. It wasn't about luxury. It was about claiming something for myself, a reminder that the little girl who had been overlooked had grown into a woman who could finally give herself gifts. Life was shifting quickly. One night, Evelyn called with news that left me speechless. "Claire," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "a major studio wants to adapt your novel. This isn't just an option, they're serious. Big budget, global release." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. A film. My words transformed into something larger than myself. I whispered into the phone, "Is this real?" She laughed softly. "It's more real than you can imagine. They'll announce it soon." I hung up and sat in silence, the bracelet cool against my skin. My heart pounded, torn between joy and terror. Joy because I had climbed a mountain I once thought impossible. Terror because every step higher meant the greater risk of being seen. The risk arrived sooner than I expected. That December, as snow fell outside, my mother called. Her voice was curt, clipped. "We're having Christmas dinner. You should come." I was stunned. For years, I had been barred, told explicitly not to show my face. Now, suddenly, I was invited. But the tone of her voice betrayed her intent. It wasn't reconciliation. It was bait. I knew them too well. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a stage. They wanted me there to ridicule, to parade me as proof of failure. I stared at the phone in silence before answering. "I'll think about it." That night, I lay awake, watching the snow drift past my window. On the nightstand sat the magazine with my pen name in bold letters, the studio contract tucked neatly beneath it. My family still thought I was nothing, and they wanted me to walk back into their den. My phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "The film announcement is scheduled for January. Brace yourself." I closed my eyes, heart thundering. Christmas was coming, and with it, the perfect storm. The first message arrived a week before Christmas. My phone buzzed, and when I opened it, the words made my chest tighten. "If you come, we'll pretend we don't know you." It was from my mother. No preamble, no warmth, just a blade disguised as a sentence. A day later, Daniel called, his voice dripping with mockery. "Mom told you not to show up, right? Good. We don't need your misery poisoning the party. But hey, if you're dying for attention, maybe you can write us another sob story." He laughed, and in the background I heard another voice, female, curious. "Who's Claire?" she asked. Daniel lowered his voice, thinking I couldn't hear. "Don't worry about her, just the family embarrassment." I hung up before I could choke on my own rage. For a while, I considered staying far away like I always had. But something felt different this year. A tension hummed beneath my skin, as if the truth was waiting for the perfect stage to reveal itself. I didn't answer my mother's message. I didn't argue with Daniel. I waited. Christmas Eve came, and their house gleamed like a postcard. Lights twinkled on the roof, the driveway filled with cars, laughter spilling into the frozen night. I stood outside for a long moment, clutching the strap of my bag, my breath forming clouds in the air. I had no intention of walking in, not yet. But curiosity tugged at me. I slipped closer to the porch, the hum of conversation drawing me like a magnet. Inside, the dining room was buzzing. Daniel played the host, moving from guest to guest, his arm draped around his girlfriend, a tall brunette with bright eyes. I recognized her face from somewhere but couldn't place it. Then I saw it. On the inside of her wrist, a small tattoo, my pen name. My pulse stuttered. She was a fan, one of the loyal readers who had once messaged me, pouring out her heart about how my stories saved her during her darkest nights. She didn't know it was me, not yet. Dinner began, and with it, the performance. My mother raised her glass, smiling sweetly at the guests before turning the knife. "We are so grateful for Daniel," she said. "He has always made us proud. Not like some people who waste their lives chasing illusions." The table chuckled politely. Daniel leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Claire used to think she could make it in media. Remember that? What was it, Claire? A radio job that lasted 2 months? She couldn't even keep that." Laughter again, sharper this time. I stood just outside the doorway, my fists clenched, the sting of their words burning through me. The humiliation was familiar, yet sharper now because I knew the truth they didn't. My bracelet, the one I bought as a promise to myself, pressed cool against my skin, reminding me I wasn't that broken girl anymore. Still, their cruelty carved through me. Tears welled, but I blinked them back. Then it happened. The television in the corner flickered as someone switched it on. A commercial burst to life, bright, cinematic. A sweeping trailer filled the screen, from the international bestseller that captured the world's heart, soon to be a major motion picture. My pen name flashed across in bold white letters, followed by a montage of scenes inspired by my book. The room fell silent. Daniel laughed nervously. "What trash? Can you believe people actually read this melodrama?" He didn't notice his girlfriend had gone pale, her eyes wide, fixed on the screen. When the trailer ended, she turned to him slowly. "That's my favorite book," she whispered. "The one that saved me. You told me it was written by someone anonymous." Daniel shrugged, dismissive. "Yeah, some nobody hiding behind a fake name. Pathetic." She stared at him, then looked toward the doorway where I stood half hidden. Recognition bloomed across her face. She'd seen my photos on fan forums, little glimpses of me at book events where I'd tried to stay anonymous. "Claire!" she breathed, her voice trembling. "It's you!" The room stirred. Guests whispered, confusion spreading like wildfire. My mother stiffened, her smile cracking. Daniel turned, his eyes narrowing as if he could will the truth back into darkness. I didn't move. I stood there, heart pounding, as every insult they had just unleashed still echoed in the air. I could have stepped inside, declared myself, demanded justice. But instead, I listened to my mother attempt to redirect the attention, to Daniel's girlfriend stammering in disbelief, to the uneasy shifting of chairs as guests realized they were watching something more than a family dinner. For one suspended moment, I thought about walking away. Let them stew in confusion. Let the secret remain just out of reach. But then a voice cut through the silence, deep and commanding. A man rose from the far end of the table, someone I hadn't noticed before. He was dressed sharply, his presence radiating authority. He lifted his glass, eyes fixed on me. "She," he said, pausing as every head turned. "She is the one I've been waiting to introduce to you all." The room froze. My mother's face drained of color. Daniel's grin faltered, trembling at the edges. And my own breath caught as the walls of my carefully guarded anonymity began to crack. The man at the end of the table stood with quiet authority, his presence silencing even the laughter that had once echoed through the room. He raised his glass again, and his words carried weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Claire Mitchell, our lead collaborator in the film adaptation that has the entire industry buzzing." The room erupted into stunned gasps. Forks clattered onto plates. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. Daniel's smug expression collapsed into disbelief. The man continued, his tone steady and proud. "Claire is the author behind the pen name you all just saw in that trailer. The voice millions have come to cherish. Without her, this project wouldn't exist." His words hung in the air, undeniable and final. Daniel's girlfriend rose from her chair so quickly it scraped against the floor. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at me, then turned to the table. "She's the one. She's the writer I told you about. The one whose stories saved me when I was at my lowest. Claire, you're my hero." Her voice cracked with emotion, and a ripple of shock passed through the guests. For a moment, no one moved. Then something unexpected happened. A middle-aged man near the fireplace stood. "I've been following your work online," he said softly, almost reverently. "Your essays kept me sane during my divorce." Another woman across the table spoke up. "My daughter reads your books. She says they gave her courage." One by one, voices rose, admitting they were readers, fans, quiet admirers who had never imagined they'd meet me in this setting. The room, once filled with laughter at my expense, now brimmed with voices defending me, lifting me, acknowledging what my family never had. It was surreal, like watching the ground shift beneath my feet, the old order cracking apart. But the silence from my family was deafening. My mother's face had gone pale, her lips pressed thin as if holding back a scream. Daniel's jaw worked furiously, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally, he spat them out. "No, this isn't real. She's a fraud. She's nothing. She's the failure we all know. She can't be—" His voice broke, rising in pitch until it cracked into a shout. "She can't be the one. She's a worthless nobody." The room recoiled at his outburst. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their earlier respect for my family dissolving into disapproval. My mother tried to regain composure, her smile brittle. "You have to understand," she said quickly. "Claire has always exaggerated. We didn't want to embarrass her, that's all. Daniel was only trying to protect—" But her excuses fell flat. Eyes that once looked upon my family with admiration now glared with judgment. The applause they had expected for Daniel's career was gone, replaced by whispers of disdain. The hierarchy my parents had built, with Daniel at the top and me at the bottom, was collapsing in front of them. I stood in the doorway, my chest tight, fighting back the tide of emotion swelling inside me. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, drunk on justice. But instead, I felt something deeper, something that stole my breath. I felt seen. For the first time in my life, people weren't dismissing me, weren't mocking me, weren't erasing me. They were recognizing me. That truth was overwhelming. My eyes burned and tears slipped down my cheeks, not from victory but from relief, from the sudden dizzying sensation of finally being visible. The room grew quiet again as my mother stumbled over another excuse, her voice cracking. Daniel sat rigid, his fists clenched, shaking his head over and over like a man refusing to face the end of his world. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone, he pushed his chair back, fell to his knees, and turned toward me. "Claire," he said hoarsely, his arrogance stripped bare, replaced with desperation. "Please, forgive me. I didn't mean it. I was jealous. I was scared. I need you to believe me." His voice trembled, his hands outstretched as though clinging to the last scraps of dignity he had left. The sight of him kneeling, the brother who had stolen my achievements, mocked my dreams, spread lies to ruin me, was almost too much to comprehend. Gasps filled the room. Some guests averted their eyes, unable to watch his collapse. Others stared at me, waiting to see what I would do. And there I stood, tears still streaking my face, staring at the man who had once taken everything from me. My heart thundered, torn between the weight of history and the undeniable shift of power in this room. The room held its breath as Daniel knelt before me, his voice cracking with desperation. My mother finally found hers, rushing to fill the silence. "Claire, he didn't mean it. We didn't mean it. You must understand. Families make mistakes, but we can fix this. We can start over." She reached out a trembling hand, her polished nails catching the light. "Come home. Be with us again. We'll change. We'll be better." Her words, once the very thing I had longed to hear, landed hollow now. I took a slow step forward, meeting her pleading gaze. My voice came steady, quiet but sharp enough to cut the air. "I cannot come back to people who erased me. You spent years telling me I was nothing. You silenced me, ridiculed me, and when I tried to shine, you snuffed out the light. Do you understand what that does to a child?" My father, who had remained silent all night, finally spoke, his voice gruff. "We were trying to protect you. The world is cruel, Claire. We didn't want you hurt." I shook my head. "No, you didn't protect me. You erased me. That's not love. That's fear disguised as care. And it nearly destroyed me." My tears had dried, replaced by a clarity that steadied me. Daniel crawled closer, his hands shaking. I was jealous, okay? I thought if you succeeded, I'd disappear. I'm sorry. Please don't hate me. We can fix this together. I stared down at him. For a moment, I searched his eyes, looking for the brother I had once hoped to admire. But all I saw was desperation, the panic of a man watching the world tilt out of his control. I don't hate you, I said softly, but forgiveness is not something you can demand in one night. You don't get to tear someone apart for decades and then ask them to forget it with a single apology. Gasps stirred in the room as I added, if you truly want a place in my life, then you will have to respect my boundaries. You will not diminish me again. You will not decide who I am allowed to be. Only then will there be room for any future between us. My mother's lips parted as if to argue, but the words never came. She saw it, the steel in my eyes, the quiet certainty that I would not bend again. Then Daniel broke. His face twisted, his voice rising into a scream that echoed off the walls. No one needs you. You're still nothing without us. The venom in his words was familiar, but what happened next was not. Every guest in that room turned against him. Chairs scraped back as people stood. The man who had introduced me earlier cut him off, his voice booming. That's enough. Everyone here sees the truth now. She doesn't need you. You need her. And your cruelty is plain to all of us. Daniel's words hung in the air like smoke, quickly suffocating in the weight of public shame. My mother sank back into her chair, pale and trembling. My father lowered his eyes, unable to face the judgment burning in the room. I drew in a slow breath, then turned toward the doorway. The air felt lighter the moment I crossed the threshold, as though the weight of decades had lifted off my shoulders. I walked down the hallway, past the framed photos where Daniel's face dominated every memory, and opened the front door. Cold winter air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying with it a sense of freedom I had never known. On the porch, I paused. Snowflakes drifted in the dark sky, catching the glow of the street lamps. For a moment, I let myself remember. The little girl clutching a drawing her mother dismissed, the teenager watching a scholarship letter torn in half, the young woman crying on a mattress in a dim apartment. I remembered her pain, her silence, her hunger to be seen. And then I thought of who I had become. A woman whose words reached millions, whose stories would soon fill theaters, who no longer needed validation from those who once denied her. My chest tightened, not with sorrow, but with peace. Living well wasn't just revenge, it was liberation. I stepped off the porch, the snow crunching beneath my boots, and walked toward the waiting car. My driver, hired by the studio for tonight's events, opened the door. As I slid inside, my phone lit up with a new message. Evelyn's name flashed across the screen, followed by words that made my heart race. The film is officially greenlit. Production begins next month. I smiled, the glow of the screen illuminating the tears on my cheeks, tears not of pain, but of triumph. For once, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward everything I had built, everything I had become.